Welcome to X-Men Evolution, Episode 8 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an X-Men animated recap podcast. I am JC, and this is my second of 3 podcasts we're recording today because I did one without Rod. I'm a filthy cheater.
You're better with that. And I'm Rod, and I figured out the secret to me not being tired in life, but also in these podcasts is I just need to eat protein. I know that's like adult
You're literally
knowledge.
just learning that like today in your 41 years of life?
Yeah, almost 42.
I know.
and I think it's because I've been having all this dental surgery the last 3 months, and so I had to make sure my protein was right because otherwise all this surgery would be for nothing. And I'm like, I just feel better in general. And they're like, oh yeah, you're probably malnutrition before. I'm like, cool. Because I'm a bad vegetarian. So yeah, I had a salad with a ton of tofu earlier and I'm feeling great now. So
you're what would happen to Spike if he didn't drink milk, basically.
There you go. Yeah.
No.
Watch, a year from now I'll be jacked. Not really, but
no, but you will develop your secondary mutation.
There you go. Which is, so the first one was a beak. The second one, slightly average intelligence. Anyway, Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we're going back and watching every single X-Men animated episode we can find. This podcast started with the original 1992 X-Men animated series, building up to the release of X-Men 97. And along the way, we've also launched our companion show, the Xavier Files, with interviews of members of the X-Men community, including voice actors from the series and a shit poster, and who knows who else in the future.
Top quality shit poster.
Right? Since season 2 of X-Men 97 is now at least a year, just optimistically, probably longer. We're back for the second half of our first watch through of X-Men Evolution.
Some quick reminders. We're a recap show about a series that started over 20 years ago. There are going to be spoilers, and if you don't want it spoiled for you, we suggest you pause the podcast, watch the episode, and then come back. We are currently not sponsored or affiliated or likely ever to be by Marvel Animation, Disney, or Disney Plus.
Don't forget to follow us on our social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, X, and Facebook. And of course, make sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast services.
Cool. And before we get into the episode, Rod and I just wanted to adjust the blob-sized elephant in the room that's going on. So this is our first episode session of recordings that we're doing since the discourse between Bodemeo, his legal team, and Disney with their responses via social media statements being picked up by Variety, etc. has happened. And if you follow us on any of our socials, you'll have seen or been aware that we actually haven't been weighing in or talking about this on our account in any way. We're a fan podcast. We are not a news organization. I give a lot of credit to the team over at New Rockstars who did a good job talking about the timeline. But even that, to an extent, they started to feel a bit like a news organization. And I don't think, unfortunately, the fandom space and news are different, and I think feelings get mixed up into that. So Rod and I have made a conscious decision that we're really not going to get into the discourse about this whole thing. We're happy to speculate about the events within the show itself, but anything that is the behind the scenes turned public drama that's happened isn't going to be something that we're going to be escalating further. There's a lot of information that is out there. The validity on certain sides is debatable, and both sides are kind of pointing fingers right now. So we're not sure what's real and not. Should one day all the facts do come out publicly and it's verifiable, then maybe we'll make a comment. But until that happens, we don't feel it's our place to weigh in with only partially informed perspectives. So
yeah, and to be honest, no one outside of the situation really knows the actual information about stuff. And yeah, you don't want us conjecturing on that. There's people online that are way too confident about stuff that they don't know, and they're not even in this town. Arguably, we have a little bit better perspective, being here, being around. And I think the only thing I would chime in with is a lot of other people worked on the show, and even specifically with the situation with Bo in the writing. I know he did a great job writing and show running and stuff, but there's so many people out there that act like he hand animated and voiced each character, and he's one piece of an important piece, but one piece of a gigantic team. So if anything, I would say give a lot more props to everyone else that hasn't gotten as much of a spotlight at the very least, because can't go wrong with that, because a lot of people work to make this happen.
That's our piece. Should something come out further that is verifiable, maybe we'll talk about it then. But, we're here to be fans of the show, not to be a gossip rag. So on to this show. Today, we're going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 8, titled Self-Possessed. It aired on November 16th of 2002. Currently sits at an 8.1 star rating on IMDb, which is also one of the top-rated tags for the episodes from the series. I watched it And then that wasn't necessarily what I felt like was going to be the rating, to be honest.
I saw the flag on there too, because I was looking up something that you had given me a heads up before that was unfruitful, but we'll get to that.
Yep.
I kind of see it in that, like, this felt more like a comic book than some of the other episodes. It was, I mean, a lot of these episodes are like this. It was like a lot to get like a little bit of progression in the overall story, but I mean, it was still fun. There was a lot of, I usually don't like start and stop these episodes very much. This was probably the most starting and stopping and rewinding, because there was just so many flashes of literal frames.
Yeah. And I also watched it before Rod did, and I shot him a note, and I'm like, there are lots of transformations in this episode.
Oh, that's what you meant. Oh, I didn't even put that together. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So just so you guys know where Rod's head was at, he literally sent me a Transformers GIF in our text thread. So
I know what I actually thought it was going to be was like secondary mutations or something, or, you know, bad guys are good guys or whatever. I don't know. And then I just forgot about it and I watched it today.
Thank God you have the attention span of a goldfish.
Right. Also, today's been busy. By the time this episode comes out, you'll know. Just go check my social media and stuff. There's been some cool stuff happening if you like early 2000s music. But,
I mean, this is all early 2000s, so perfect.
Yeah, that's perfect. Actually,
you're just a nostalgia whore, basically.
Yeah, because like, where have I got to go from here? But actually, you know, so about the transformations, now that I had this later in my notes, but like, this had to have been like a more expensive episode, right? Time-wise, at least, or something, because we saw how the transformations worked with Mystique when it was just like Skybeam, or not even Skybeam, like the Mr. Fantastic.
I don't know. I mean, I think to an extent, like a show like this, they're still animating by frame, so it's not like, you know, they're recycling old clips like the Hanna-Barbera days and stuff like that. So a frame is still a frame. I don't know, maybe the big crowd shots that had a shit ton of people in them, that was actually where they were recycling a few shots in the concert scene. So who knows? But
there were also like, there was one scene where there was a transformation. They did like a 360 around the character. And I was like, wow, that had to have been like a lot of planning. And like, I don't know, it's so much stuff. But
I don't think with hand drawn it necessarily costs more. I think it just might have been, okay, we're using our better artists on this one. You know, starting off, we get Rogue and Scott, who are playing racquetball.
I had to double take, make sure that wasn't pickleball.
It's not pickleball. Pickleball has two, like, people on different sides of a net. So
yeah.
Scott misses a shot, but he's like running for it, and he's hitting it. Like, if he hit it, it would have gone in the wrong direction anyway. So I don't know if the animators necessarily knew how to play racquetball, but that's kind of aside from the point.
He has not very good peripheral vision. He's like literally wearing like a visor thing.
Right. Rogue specifically offers a rematch for the next night. And that's where we start to see that even though they've had the moment between Scott and Jean, not everybody else is fully aware of what is going on. And that's where he's like, oh yeah, you know, going to the concert with Jean. And Rogue plays it off well, and she says she's not a big fan of the Desansko rivets or something like that.
Yeah, I was not familiar with that, and I didn't even think to look it up.
I mean, I'm assuming it's like, what was the something pus or whatever it was in the first season? The whatever blisters that the Kitty and Evan didn't like?
It's the name of a restaurant. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it at.
Yeah.
Descanso rivets?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that the name of an actual restaurant?
Descanso is. However you pronounce that. I'm probably butchering that. And then the only other entry here is Xmen Wiki for that specific episode.
Perfect. But they're like, yeah, sure, you know, we'll play next week. And Rogue starts to like have like a minor flash of Jean. And that's where you started saying like there's just lots of flashes and stop and goes in this episode.
I'm just so conditioned to tune out during those flashes because they've been using them as transitions from scenes, and like by the second or third one I was like, oh, I gotta rewind. Those were important, maybe not the specific moments, but like who's in them.
Most of the time, yes, but some of them were totally arbitrary and random too. It is inconsistent. And then we go to the second scene of this cold open where a car is pulling up, Destiny is in the back seat, and a cat hops through in the window. So obviously we knew that was going to be Mystique. And Destiny mentions that the visions with Rogue are unclear, and basically kind of being like, oh, she's supposed to be in our future, but now we're not sure if she's going to live long enough to be there for it. She doesn't say live long enough, but be there for it. It's like, oh, yeah. she's gonna die or something like that. So
this network sensor talk for die.
yeah, exactly. And then Rogue, back in the racquetball court, smashes through the wall, and she's super strong like Blob. She throws the racket right through.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's where I noticed, because she had a flash of Blob. I was like, why is she thinking about Blob? Okay.
Yeah, because and props to one of the fandom wikis. I can't remember which one I pulled it off of, but yeah, they basically in this episode go through every single character that she has absorbed at one point or another on this. So
I was wondering about that. I was like, they had to have kept track of that because it was so specific who she went through.
Yep. Cuts into the animated intro. I didn't feel like watching it this time.
I never watched it.
I feel bad because it's not that they did a bad job. It just does not click the same way. So
yeah.
Next morning, Rogue is brushing her hair. She is about to walk out her door, opens it right as Wolverine is there, and Wolverine is asking about the racket that was installed into the wall, essentially.
Yeah, and then Kitty interrupts. Not that Rogue was going to answer. I think
no, but Kitty had the perfect timing of like, I'm going to make the save even though I don't know it.
Yeah, she's like, Jean just got a new SUV. She's going to give us a ride to school.
Yep. Yeah, which, like, okay, I got to know, because Scott doesn't have parents. He was an orphaned kid, and they've not addressed any of the stuff with his family. Was that a gift from Jean's parents for her 18th birthday, or was that just Xavier giving his kids cars, basically?
Or Jean's a trust fund baby, and it was just, she just got it.
Right. So Rogue, Kitty, and Jean are in the car. Kitty asks about going to the concert together, the second time we've heard about the concert. And Jean mentions that she's actually going to be going with Scott. And Kitty does what we all want to do, which is like, just point it out, like, you're going on a date. Just admit you're finally going on a date. Yeah,
she was a little clueless at first, though. She was like, well, he'd love to have us all. Just like, not like that. Kind of.
He might.
Yeah.
If this is Scott from the comics, Scott's a whore. Remember that.
Yeah. Rogue is sulking in the back, and she's like, just let it go. And all the other girls are like, all right, Nightcrawler poofed in.
Yeah, he poofs into the front seat, makes it there in time. He finds out from Kitty what's going on, and his response is about time. And then that's when Rogue got pretty defensive and pissy about it.
And then all the kids are like, that's weird. Like, why do you have a problem about this? I wonder if they're going to come back to that, like in a later episode, like they're planting seeds of everyone noticing Rogue having a crush on Scott.
Yeah, because we had a break from it because it happened a lot in the first season, a little bit during the second season, but the start of this first season, like, it really hasn't been addressed until this episode itself. So
yeah,
in school, Rogue starts to phase through a door, has a Kitty flashback, and that's where we see Risty in the girls' room.
This is how long we've not watched the show. I was like, oh yeah, do they know? I mean, I guess they don't know she's Mystique.
Yeah, so I had to have that half-second moment of, wait, does Rogue know that Risty is? And we realized it was never revealed to her. So
yeah, well, and then I also had like a split second where I was like, was there a real Risty? You know, and then but that passed really quickly. But for a second, I was like, was this the real Risty that came back? I was like, no, because we saw Mystique earlier, so that makes sense.
In the context of the show, it has always been Mystique.
Yeah.
Does that mean she didn't kill a girl and become her? Not necessarily.
Yeah, that's what I was like. How long till we find like a body in a locker at that high school?
Yeah, Rogue, is like, be like, oh my God, where have you been? And she's like, yeah, I was stuck in England, and sorry I haven't been around. My parents wouldn't let me come back, and blames it on the night of the dance where all the mutants got revealed, essentially.
I mean, that's a pretty solid excuse.
Yeah.
And also, we're remembering, that time period. It was much more difficult to communicate to other people, like that. If something suddenly happened, it wasn't like you just text them or something, or you might if you had like a track phone or something. But like it was just like so spotty. Like you can't assume that Rogue had a phone or all that stuff. Like, there was no social media.
I want to say at one point, like, if you sent over a certain number of text messages, you would get charged for them. Like, that was a thing when phone plans added unlimited texting. Like, I don't remember the years that happened, but that was actually a big thing back in 15 years ago or so.
I mean, I remember prepaying for a certain number of texts, but even then, not all my friends had a phone that could receive them, so it wasn't like an easy thing. So like, especially if there were just two girls that saw each other at school all the time and some tragedy happened and then one had to go back to England or whatever, like that's a viable story of like, oh yeah, I just wasn't going to make a long distance call or something. As
you're saying it, it's all clicking with me because I don't think I ever thought about it before. There is a certain age group of us who will put giant paragraphs into a single text message. I think it's because we were all trained that you had to fit as much information into a single text as you could. Otherwise, you'd pay more if you put 2 or 3 words per line.
You know, that makes sense. I always thought that I was so annoyed by the friends who would like text each word of a thought one at a time.
Because it would cost you money. It might be a subconscious thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it's just annoying to have my phone like just be.
Yeah, and that's totally fair.
But that probably doesn't help either. Yeah, I just thought. Yeah, that's a good point. That we had to fit. And even then, it was like what 120 characters. It was whatever the length of a tweet was.
It was 120 or 160. I can't remember, but you were spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, because like that's why tweets used to have that character limit. Because you would. Oh my god,
you would text it to Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fuck, we're old.
Jeez. Yeah.
So Rogue is apologizing for not getting in touch with her. Risty's being like, no, my bad, I wasn't there for you. And they go up to a water fountain, and Rogue has a storm flash and electrocutes the drinking fountain, and then she runs off.
Yeah, and was it Risty that was like, is that your power? And he's like, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
And what did Rogue describe it as? Like, it's getting awfully crowded in my head.
Yeah, so Rogue goes outside, and they're having a conversation by a bench, and like, Risty is trying to like be there for her, and Rogue's like, no, I'm not that I don't want to explain it to you. I want to. It's just really hard. When I absorb somebody, I absorb their life force and their memories. Some of them get put into a coma, and everything stays there, and then it's getting pretty crowded. And I think that's really the first time where they mention that it stays there. Like, that really hadn't been addressed so far in the series.
Yeah, because the Rogue I'm used to, it doesn't stay unless she holds on for, because it wasn't kind of established in 92, like that Rogue, it was like proportional to the amount of time she actually held on to someone.
Right, because that's why she had a permanent hold of Carol Danvers' powers, which I believe is accurate to most of the comic, because she would usually absorb somebody and the power would wear off. I do believe at one point there was a scenario where all the personalities were still there. They were just so minor and it became overcrowded, but not to the point where she could just trigger powers at will kind of scenario.
Yeah, just by thinking about people.
Yeah. And Risty's like, you know what? You need time to like relax, and we need to just go make fun of the geeks at the concert.
Okay, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I love spending money to go make fun of people.
I guess, you know, the way all the kids were talking about it and the way the concert looked, man, I forgot about this era where even a bigger concert, like, you could just decide to go that evening and get tickets.
Yeah, and you weren't even paying, like, scalper prices. As long as it wasn't, like, that era, I feel like a Madonna or somebody like that, you couldn't do that to, or, like, a Metallica, but that next tier of person, you could probably buy day of and get floors tickets if you wanted.
Yeah, and it'd be, like, probably, what, $50 or something?
If that, dude.
Yeah. Like normally, like, we'd be like 20 or something, but like upper would be 50. Now I look at ticket prices, I'm like, I might have to take out a mortgage.
You're like, I don't like loans.
Yeah, like, it's wild. Like, I think I saw one artist I wanted to see, and it was like the cheapest ticket was like almost $1,000. It was like,
what artist was that was almost $1,000?
I think it was Sade. I mean, she's a legend.
I was gonna say, no disrespect to them, but that is a fucking ridiculous price for a concert.
And I think I even saw it was like a whole experience. Like, they had like bottle service and stuff. I was like, I get it, it's a date thing.
Okay, but, bottle service, that's half the price right there, probably.
But like, still, like, what if I just want to sit there and listen to her sing, you know, by your side?
No, sir, you could go fuck yourself. So it cuts over to the concert that night, and this is where I texted Rod that there's a music cue, and it is a full-fledged song. Like that.
There's 2 of them.
Yeah.
I could not find anything. It was still the same William guy that was listed as a composer. I tried like looking up at any libraries that I knew about, and nothing. And then I even like, my last ditch effort was like Shazam. And I don't know if you tried this, but like,
no, I did not. When it's music stuff, I literally say Rod.
Right. So what's funny is because they put such loud crowd noise in it, every time I Shazammed it, it would just give me some random live song.
Oh, and okay.
And it was always something super obscure. Like the first one that popped up was some Russian band, I think, or like some Eastern European band. And and at first I was like, oh, that would make sense if it's kind of obscure. And I listened, like, no, it just got the crowd noise. And I tried it again, and it's some other, not very well known to me at least, band. And I was like, oh, this is going to be fruitless because there's crowd noise throughout the entire thing. Then the second song they played, I like looked up the lyrics because they were very clear lyrics for 3 lines and then 1 at the end, so 4 total. Absolutely no matches in any database that I have access to.
Yeah, and I would say even at this point, by season 3, the wikis got a little weaker. I mean, which happens in almost every single show. You get the wiki editors who like go hardcore on the first season, and then they start to lighten, and then by like one of the wikis I get to by season 3, it literally doesn't even have a plot breakdown. There's just like, this is the episode name. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so and I guess to describe the band, to me it sounded like kind of like Manson crossed with either like Weezer or Nirvana or something, you know, like. Yeah,
I could see that. It was too hard to be Weezer, but it wasn't full Manson.
Yeah, like the intro sounded most like Manson, and then when the vocals started, it's like, oh, this is more of like a Weezer, one of the more catchier Nirvana songs or something. But it's wild. I think there was another song that people were looking for on Reddit a while back, and they found it in like a porn, and then they actually found those writers and stuff. I have a feeling this is not a porn, but something similar where, and I mentioned this before, where the composer of the show probably just had friends and he was like, listen, you want a couple $1,000? And then they just gave them rights to a song that they weren't going to make money off of otherwise. That's my theory. I don't know. It's the same thing with the Toad song. We don't know who that rapper is. So
the Toad song is great though.
Right.
It's just a shame we're never going to get it because Disney does not give a shit about this show.
Yeah, or they're just gonna like, they're kind of ignoring it because it was like a fuzzy legal era. Like the fact that it's not even listed in the credits is wild, but it's something you only get away with in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
In the concert, we see Boom Boom, who hasn't been around for a few episodes since leaving the Brotherhood and all that stuff. Kurt is out with Amanda, which means she's definitely breaking her parents' rule about her not still dating him. And then Kitty walks in with Jamie. And I'm like, isn't he too young for her? But then I remembered, like, she's only like a 14 or 15-year-old, so they're not that far off. And he's wearing like a suit that's too big for him, which we found out he got from Roberto. It's still weird now saying Roberto without it being referenced to Guy's Roberto in 97, but I digress.
Yeah, like he Jamie's ready to go to prom. That's basically what he did.
Yeah, I mean, he literally brought a corsage
to a concert, to a rock concert.
Yeah, I do like that she actually points out how old he is. She's like, no, you were just the only one that didn't have plans. Also, you're like 12.
And he didn't disagree, so I think we can safely say he's 12, right?
Jean sees the two of them as her and Scott are on the floor, and she kind of snickers. They have a very in-depth conversation about what their status is on the floor of a rock concert.
It's 2000s, man. Sitcom backgrounds, right?
No, because Scott is, of course, asking, well, what is that? And she's like, it's payback. She thought we were on a date. Can you imagine? And we talked about this 2 episodes ago. Have they had the talk since the awkward moment in the Mexican basement of what their relationship was? Obviously, the answer is no. They're having it on the floor of this concert right now.
And like in real life, that conversation probably would have happened on the way to the concert or something. But because it's television, people don't exist when there's transition segments. So like they got to the concert presumably by driving, but they didn't exist in that point because we didn't see them because they can't have a conversation while they're in transportation.
Nope, they just sat in silence. Literally, it's like they're robots that as soon as you're not looking at them, they just turn off effectively.
Yeah. And I brought up this trope before where like someone will start a conversation in one building and then finish that line in the next location,
which was a 3-hour drive away.
Yeah. So like if you really thought about like logistically how things worked, like did they just stop mid-sentence, drive silently, and then arrive in like Madripoor and then complete their sentence?
I think it happened especially in the not Jack the Ripper episode from 92.
Oh yeah.
That in particular was a thing. So Scott even asked, like, is this a date? And at that point, it gets interrupted where Rogue sees Scott. We swap over to her perspective on it. She's with Risty, and she has the flashback. The red eyes flash really quickly, and Risty realizes what's going on, and not on the power aspect, but, oh, do you still have a thing for him? Which is, it's like, in the context of that's her mom, it's like, ugh. Like, right. No. As soon as you think about it that way from Rogue's perspective, it's like, ew, mom, no. Even if they had a great relationship, you're like, I don't want to talk about this with you.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about this right now.
Yeah. They used the shot like 3 different times where there was one girl sitting on the shoulders of her presumed boyfriend or some dude. And then this girl falls backward at one point, just because I guess it got loud is what the animation gave me the impression of.
Yeah.
But she falls backward. As she's falling, ends up ripping the sleeve off of Rogue's top because Rogue was like covered head to toe aside from her face. That girl's dead.
Right.
She fell on a cement floor, or at best, the board that they put on top of a hockey rink when a concert happens at a arena.
After having a part of her life force drained.
See, I don't think that girl had the part of the life force drain. I think she just like fell enough to grab.
Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
she's still dead, but for a different reason.
Right. Yeah, but then everybody else starts running into Rogue. And that's the situation that we've all said, like, why is she in public? Because this could happen.
So, yeah, there's like one dude who's really close by who just vaguely touches her and he just faints. And I mean, this is like going to a club like that people are just like, and they're drugged and they're falling over and everybody's okay with this kind of thing. And finally, after 3 people bump into Rogue, Risty does. And that's where we have a Mystique transformation and like power swapping and all that kind of stuff happens.
And they touch for a while.
And these like, I want to say they started like screaming or giving the impression of screaming. Right. It's not Lenore, so your cat Lucy wasn't freaked out by the screaming. So
yeah, I didn't think that they would out Mystique that quickly after bringing Risty back, but good for them, I guess.
One thing that pseudo spoiler, I guess, but it's not really because of the reveal. This is the last episode where she appears as Risty. So
yeah, right. That would be bold to come back.
Yep. So Rogue turns into Risty. Mystique is falling over, fainted in blue mode, and then there's like a bunch of back and forth changes, and then she turns into Sabretooth.
What a random transformation too, right?
I forgot she had absorbed Sabretooth at any point. Like, yeah. I mean, that was season 1, and it's been a while since we watched that. So
yeah, I feel like everything else had like at least a touch of like I could see where it came from. Like when she looks at Scott or the water fountain, maybe an element like water or something reminder of Storm.
There was always some connection to it.
Yeah, this one's like I'm angry, Sabretooth.
I mean, I think that was literally what the connection was, to be honest. And then we go into a series of different like set piece action moments. Jumps onto the stage, starts climbing through the rafters and stuff start to collapse, speakers start falling over. Jean is able to stop the speakers from crushing a bunch of kids who didn't know when to run quick enough, obviously. Kitty saves a girl from being decimated by Sabretooth. And then the dumbest thing I've ever seen in the show, Jamie tries to overwhelm Sabretooth by tackling him as 5 versions of a 12-year-old.
I thought that was going to be a moment where Rogue turned into like 5 Sabretooths.
I mean, it's not a bad theory.
Yeah, she got tackled by him, right? And she was still like touching.
But like the piece for me is like, it's the hypothetical, like, oh, how many 12-year-olds could you fight before they can overtake you?
Right.
As a normal person, is a lot to deal with. A normal, average built, not super athletic person. Sabretooth is a literal monster.
You would have shredded.
Yeah. There are comic pages from a recent story called the Sabretooth War, where he's literally ripping like Wolverine's son Daken into pieces with his bare hands. Jamie, at 12 years old and no skill fighting whatsoever, he would have been confetti.
The Boys has ruined like the suspension of disbelief for superhero stuff because you watch this and you're like, oh, what would actually happen?
Yeah. It literally would have been the equivalent of Homelander in a normal human. That's what it would have been. Yeah.
Oh, like the web weaver scene, right?
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Just in case you don't want to spoil it for you.
If you have a weak stomach, don't ask.
Yeah, or don't watch The Boys.
Yeah, that's true. If you have a weak stomach, you're not getting to the web weaver stuff.
No, you don't even get that close.
We have another save from Kirk. Yeah, because there was a fan who was definitely going to get murdered by a speaker or something like that at that point. There are lots of close calls in this show that definitely was an upgrade from a danger perspective by comparison to 92, I will say.
And I'll give the writers or animators, whoever decided the scenes, credit. I don't even know if it was on purpose, but this is kind of accurate because my first job out of college is I worked at an AV company. We set up a lot of those setups like this with the giant speakers and stuff. There's something about falling speakers. I don't know if it's like a freezing shock kind of thing, or when people who don't work with that equipment a lot look at it, they don't see it as heavy as it actually is. Mm-hmm. So there's been a couple instances, and some things that made national news that you've probably seen where like speakers fall and they kill people. There's that stage in Indiana about a decade ago at a country concert that killed a whole front row people and stuff. Like, they just don't start running as soon as there's danger because they think they look at it, and not that they think it's light, but I don't think that they get
they
the
don't
literal
think it's going to
gravity.
fully fall over either, too.
Yeah, and then on a personal experience thing, I remember being at Wilmington Jazz Festival, I think, in Delaware, and we were setting up in the middle of like a field, and it just rained the day before.
And you killed a ton of people.
Well, so the ground looked dry, but I guess it was only the surface. So after you broke through a certain level, still mud. And so these speakers, it wasn't even the show hadn't started. It was like the day before we were setting up, and we had an intern with us, and the speakers started falling. So all of us that had worked there for years just stepped aside.
Mm-hmm.
That intern literally held his hands up. We're like, dude, no.
Let the speaker fall.
Yeah, because like they're expensive. Like, yeah, but you die. Like the speakers, like there was a stack of 3 speakers. Each of them had to be at least 1,000 pounds.
Yeah,
there's no making that. Like a vehicle wouldn't survive under that. So I saw this and I was like, it looked ridiculous, but I think, you know, besides the power stuff, like that's kind of like an accurate response from like people who don't work with audio equipment all the time. It's like, whoa, the speaker's falling. It's like, you should have run when it creaked. Just so if you're ever at a concert or like a thing where there's giant speakers and AV equipment, if you get that Final Destination feeling, even like half a percent,
it's accurate. Get out of the way of the speaker.
Just go, because it's not worth it. Because once you realize how dangerous it is, it's too late. It's already accelerated way too much. So anyway, that's my little spiel.
Remember at the start of Evolution, we were like, oh yeah, high school trauma. Now we're like speaker death.
Speaker death should be like a metal cover band's name.
That's actually really good.
Right? Someone do it.
Before I forget, our favorite random background character, Ellen DeGen, did actually appear in the crowd shot from the concert too.
Didn't even notice.
Yep. Scott makes a save. Sabretooth, quote unquote, gets buried under a bunch of rubble. And then from under the rubble, Rogue transforms into Juggernaut.
That one made sense.
Yes. And then proceeds to run past a bunch of people. Looked like they were chasing one person for a second, but they get through and just runs through a wall. And then Mystique follows. It was the only time like it felt like a little bit of a continuity issue. Nobody here knew where Rogue was at this time.
Right.
So Scott is like, yeah, we're going to all regroup at the mansion. And it's like, why are you regrouping at the mansion? Shouldn't you just go chase Juggernaut? Also, one of your teammates is missing.
Yeah, I guess he's still on the date.
Fair. Yeah, but nobody seems to care that Rogue is missing, especially Jamie, who is still hitting on Kitty as she's like dragging him out of the venue.
Yeah, the kid doesn't give up. He's not a quitter.
Yep. Around the downtown area, where for there being a massive attack at a venue, there's only one cop driving around.
Still kind of accurate.
That cop sees Juggernaut. Rogue turns into Magneto and then proceeds to use magnetic powers to push the car back, turns into Quicksilver, runs off, and then at the last minute turns into Arcade, who is one of the only non-powered people, which also doesn't have a costume, so it's a rather good person to change into.
It was definitely one of the times I had to rewind. I was like, who was that? And I saw Cerebro on his head, and I was like, oh, that guy.
Yep. And then turns back into Rogue.
Yeah, like in a back alley.
Yeah, in an alley, essentially. So at that point, Mystique arrives, finds her, and then is like trying to calm her down because now everything is out of the bag with regard to Risty, and they start to fight. And if you notice, all of the stuff that Mystique is doing is all defensive. There's not a single like offensive move because she's trying not to look like an adversary at this point, essentially.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Rogue is kind of like not wanting to believe her, not falling for it, and she's like, look, you know what my memories are. You absorbed them. I adopted you when you were 4, and at that point, Rogue is able to kind of get away, is crying, and teleports up to the roof. On the rooftop, she's like upset, obviously, and turns into Sabretooth, and you get the smell singing it. And I was like, oh, Rod's favorite moment. The love is coming across again.
See, I read that as she sensed Logan and then turned into Sabretooth.
Oh, you had it the other way.
Yeah, whether it was the smell or just like the whatever, feral awareness. Feral Awareness is another good band name.
Yeah, I interpreted it as like because of the rage that was still going.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She turned into Sabretooth, and when she turned into Sabretooth, the smell is like, oh, there he is, then proceeds to tackle a Wolverine who is wearing a helmet, which is just funny looking to me.
Safety first.
Yeah. Who is in his new uniform, by the way, the one that we saw at the beginning of the season. The one that was inspired by the Ultimate X-Men comics.
Yeah.
And Wolverine very quickly realizes that it is not Sabretooth because of how good his sense of smell is. So
like, I'm not in love with this one.
I love that Rogue doing all the Mystique level transformation and getting people's powers. It's got to be pheromones. Like, I don't know if that's the like technical term, but there's got to be something that she is not duplicating, and that is the only thing that is not being bothered by the powers to duplicate on stuff.
Yeah, because that's a trope in a lot of storylines, right? There's always someone who can like smell like an animal or something, and then they sense the shapeshifter being different.
I don't watch a lot of shapeshifter stories outside of X-Men, so maybe. Cyclops pulls up in the van and proceeds to shoot who he thinks is Sabretooth. And like, FYI, that is not who you think it is. Probably shouldn't try to kill them.
Yeah.
Logan and Scott are going to go in, and then you got Magma, Kurt, Roberto, and one of the others, Bobby, maybe? I don't know.
Iceman would make sense.
Yeah.
Because he's there later.
God, my notes really just turned to shit at this point. And inside this warehouse, she's just having a ton of different memory flashes and attacks Cyclops as Cyclops.
I guess it makes sense because, they've established in pretty much every version that there's something about that optic blast is like the only thing that can hurt Sinister. And, there's so many like applications where it's like a superior power set.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, I'm trying to think of a time where it's been a Cyclops versus a Cyclops scenario. Mm-hmm. But Havoc and Cyclops, if they hit each other with their product or their powers, they negate each other. So I wonder what happens if you Cyclops a Cyclops.
Man, some science creator should just get into like the physics of like the Marvel universe or something.
Let's have Scott do it.
There you go. You want to give Scott an aneurysm?
Not particularly, no.
How does biology work in the X-Men universe? And go.
You just get blocked on social by him. She then turns into Avalanche and starts knocking over a bunch of like the boxes and debris. She turns into herself and is able to actually ask for help for a second. And they're mentioning that they're her friends. The friend comment triggers the Risty memory, and then that literally just sets Rogue off completely.
She turns into Storm and then just murders everyone in the building by exploding.
Yeah. And then gets rammed by a jet.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
I want to know what their plan was if that wasn't Rogue who could deflect it, because they were hitting her dead on with a jet.
Murder's an option now.
Jean tries to use her telekinetic. That doesn't work. She's able to use Storm's like own lightning bolt power against her and stuff. Like, they're literally just showing how powered up this version of Rogue is, essentially.
My note for this scene was, this is very similar to the final fight scene in Secret Invasion.
Interesting.
Like, it's just like a kind of almost random cycling of power transformations. This one was not as cringy as Secret Invasion, but like it's just similar energy because it's just like a lot of fast-paced fighting. Like, oh, here's a Hulk arm or leg or whatever they use from them.
Then we get Ice Up, which reminded me of Belly Up for a quick second, where Bobby basically makes a like little platform that shoots Logan off, who's able to tackle Rogue. They land on the top of a car, and then she turns into multiple versions of herself with Cyclops blast powers.
Yeah, someone yells like, she's got all the powers now. And like, that's the moment that reminded me of Secret Invasion.
Mm-hmm. And then Logan is able to get through to her. I did see a comparison that the relationship with Rogue and Wolverine here was reminiscent of the X-Men live action movies, because in those she had essentially taken like that Jubilee being like the younger one that he was taking under his wing, and that's able to give her pause, and Xavier's like, let us wipe them out together. And then we get to what you were talking about, where it was that 360 pan of all the different powers and stuff like that. The wipe them out phrasing I don't like for Charles. And again, I know I've hit this over the head. This is an accurate version to the comic book version where Charles is a little bit callous in certain respects and stuff like that. But I'm just like, we're going to wipe them out. And it's like, what is the long-term effect of wiping somebody's like parts of their memory out, you know?
I was wondering if that meant, knowing what we know about Rogue otherwise, does that delete them? Like, is that second death?
It might be. Like, that's the impression I got from it.
Because if you're like, even though Carol probably doesn't show up in this show, in other iterations of Rogue, like if Carol Danvers is permanently in a box in her head and you wipe her out, does that mean she's just gone?
Right. Or pieces of those people are gone too. Like, yeah. And Xavier's basically, not sure if she's going to be okay.
At least he's honest.
Mm-hmm. And then Mystique sees them carrying away Rogue, essentially. Mm-hmm. In the infirmary, apparently Logan has not left her side. So he really is like, being the dad in the scenario.
Well, because he related to the betrayal, right? The PTSD of betrayal, somebody trusted, because he's probably lived it like a dozen times now. Yeah,
and he even says like point blank, he's like, betrayal stays with you. And she does like the thing of like gripping his hand back and stuff like that. It's like, she's going to be okay. Then you cut back to the limo, which is now outside of the Institute. And they see that, Rogue is back in the future according to destiny. But there's also great darkness on the horizon. An ancient mutant will rise once again, and then that's kind of how it ends. And it's like, okay, it feels like it led to something big, and to your point, it got a lot of character moments out of it. So
yeah, it was like, okay, clearly this is like another, like they're doing like a Thanos setup for Apocalypse.
Yeah,
where they're just throwing him in the last minute of everything, and then especially with the next episode, which you guys will hear next week. Also, if all goes well, you'll see us next week. Yeah,
if
next
it
week's
works.
episode is interesting. It should be good.
Yep.
I've been on the receiving end of it before, and it's been fun. But it was just fine episode. Like I said, I think it felt most like a comic book for me of the recent episodes, at least, just because we finally kind of got not even a story behind Rogue, but just like more of like what her powers are and deeper understanding about that, and then finally fucking like reveal Mystique in something. yeah. I mean, it was fine. I don't necessarily know if I would say it was one of the top episodes, like because the top usually go to like the top 5 rated. I want to say I thought it was fine, but yeah, it was. I don't know that it was a lot of powers being used. Yeah. If anybody knows what songs those were, let me know. It's going to drive me crazy.
Yeah. So that's going to wrap it up for us. Thank you guys for joining us. If you have any thoughts, make sure you drop them into the comments for either the YouTube upload, the official Instagram post, or the Spotify post for this. Now I feel like that's like them throwing down the gauntlet on Apple Podcasts, that they need to put some sort of comment section now too, because nobody's doing reviews, man. Like I don't care. Like we've said it, we've seen it, but like not everybody goes and does one review. If you're going to play the game where you're competing against YouTube as being a podcast platform, you got to have engagement on every single episode. But that's just
every platform wants every other platform's features. So there you are.
And if you like what we heard, even though I just said they don't matter, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast app of your choosing. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, and CastBox. I should actually check to see if we're still on iHeartRadio. I've not actually paid attention to that since I put us there.
Hey, iHeartRadio fans, let us know if you're still there. Or fan.